The Whispering Lighthouse. It was a bitterly cold December night when Eliza arrived in the small coastal town of Driftwood. Her uncle, an eccentric historian, had recently passed, leaving her the deed to the old lighthouse perched on the cliffs above the town. Locals called it the Widow's Light, and the stories surrounding it were grim. They spoke of shipwrecks, strange disappearances, and ghostly voices in the wind. Eliza, ever skeptical, dismissed the tales as small-town superstition. She had inherited the lighthouse and intended to sell it after sorting through her uncle's belongings. That evening, she trudged up the steep path, the wind howling around her, the waves crashing violently below. The lighthouse stood tall and menacing against the dark sky, its single unlit window staring like a black eye. Inside, the air was musty and the walls were lined with her uncle's journals, maps, and faded photographs of sailors and ships. She found an old oil lantern and lit it, its faint glow casting long shadows across the room. Eliza climbed the spiraling staircase to the lantern room at the top. The Fresnel lens was intact but dusty, its intricate glasswork reflecting the flickering light in strange patterns. She stood there for a moment, gazing out at the restless sea, when she heard it. A faint whisper. "Eliza, why have you come?" She froze. The voice was soft, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakable. She spun around, the lantern shaking in her hand, but the room was empty. "Who's there?" she called, her voice wavering. Silence. Telling herself it was just the wind, she descended the staircase and settled into the small bedroom her uncle had used. She found another journal on the bedside table, its leather cover cracked with age. Curious, she opened it and began to read. The entries were chilling. Her uncle had written about hearing voices in the lighthouse, whispers of sailors lost at sea. He spoke of shadowy figures that appeared in the corner of his eye but vanished when he turned. He described vivid dreams of drowning, of cold water pulling him into the depths. Eliza's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The last entry was hastily scrawled. "The light must stay dark. They come when it shines. I am sorry, Eliza. Forgive me." A chill ran down her spine. At that moment, the lantern beside her flickered and went out. She scrambled to relight it, but the room was plunged into darkness. Then she heard the whispers again, louder this time, surrounding her. "Eliza, you shouldn't have come." Her breath caught in her throat as a cold hand brushed against her shoulder. She turned, and there, illuminated by a faint, otherworldly glow, stood the shadowy figures her uncle had described. Their faces were pale and gaunt, eyes like empty voids. Water dripped from their tattered clothes, pooling on the floor. One stepped forward, a spectral sailor whose hollow gaze met hers. "The light must remain dark," he rasped, "or we cannot rest." Terrified, Eliza stumbled back, but her foot caught on the edge of the rug, and she fell, striking her head. When she awoke, the lighthouse was silent. The lantern was lit again, its steady glow the only comfort in the oppressive stillness. But as she rose, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The Fresnel lens above was glowing, casting a beam of light out to sea. She rushed up the stairs, her uncle's warning echoing in her mind. The light must stay dark. At the top, she found the lens spinning, though the mechanism hadn't been repaired in years. She tried to stop it, but her hands passed through it like mist. Below, the whispers grew louder, rising to a deafening roar. Outside, the storm had worsened, and in the distance, a ship's faint light could be seen, heading straight for the cliffs. "No!" Eliza screamed, pounding on the lens. "Turn back!" But it was too late. The ship crashed against the rocks with a sickening sound, its crew's screams merging with the wailing wind. The whispers stopped. The light dimmed, and Eliza stood there, trembling, as new shadows joined the others in the room below. The next morning, the townsfolk found the lighthouse dark and empty. They never saw Eliza again. But on the stormy nights, they say, the widow's light shines once more, and the whispers of the drowned call out, warning others to stay away or join them. The Whispering Lighthouse. Part 2. Years passed after Eliza's disappearance, and the widow's light remained abandoned. The lighthouse stood as a grim monument to its dark history. Despite warnings, it drew thrill seekers, ghost hunters, and the occasional drifter, all eager to uncover its mysteries. Few stayed longer than a single night. Those who did spoke of shadowy figures, eerie whispers, and the unmistakable feeling of drowning while standing on dry land. But one winter, a man named Callum arrived in Driftwood, drawn by the lighthouse's legends. Unlike the others, Callum wasn't seeking thrills. He was an investigative journalist with a reputation for debunking the paranormal. To him, the stories were nothing more than exaggerated folklore. "You'll regret it," warned the innkeeper as she handed him his room key. "That lighthouse doesn't just haunt, it claims people, like the girl who went up there years ago, Eliza, never seen again." "I'll be fine," Callum replied, his confidence unwavering. The next morning, armed with his camera, a tape recorder, and a thermos of coffee, Callum hiked up to the lighthouse. Snow blanketed the ground, and the ocean roared far below. The structure loomed ahead, its weathered walls streaked with salt and moss. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Callum's breath hung in the air as he unpacked his equipment. He took a series of photographs focusing on the spiral staircase and the lantern room above. Then he set up his recorder and began his investigation. "This is Callum Wright," he said into the mic, his voice echoing in the empty space. "It's December 15th, and I'm inside the Widow's Light. Locals claim the lighthouse is haunted by the spirits of sailors and others who perished in shipwrecks. I'll be spending the night here to see if there's any truth to these claims." As the hours passed, nothing happened. Callum reviewed his recordings, but they yielded no unusual sounds. He snapped photos, but they revealed nothing beyond peeling paint and cracked windows. By midnight, he was ready to call it a night. But just as he began packing his things, the whispers started. At first, they were faint, like the rustling of leaves. Callum froze, holding his breath. The sound grew louder, distinct words forming. "Leave! Before it's too late!" He grabbed his recorder, his pulse quickening. "Who's there?" he called, scanning the room. "Is someone playing a trick on me?" The whispers didn't answer, but the temperature plummeted. Frost crept up the walls, and the lantern on the table flickered before going out. Callum fumbled for his flashlight, but before he could turn it on, he felt it, a cold hand brushing against his arm. He whipped around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The whispers rose to a cacophony, dozens of voices overlapping, pleading, warning, crying. He stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard and falling hard. From his position on the ground, he saw them, shadowy figures emerging from the walls, their faces gaunt and waterlogged, their eyes pools of darkness. Among them was a young woman, her long hair dripping with seawater, her eyes wide with despair. Callum recognized her instantly from the faded newspaper clippings he'd seen in town. "Eliza," he whispered. She stepped forward, her translucent form shimmering in the dim light. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice echoing with sorrow. "They won't let you leave." "Who? What is this place?" Callum demanded, scrambling to his feet. Eliza turned her gaze to the lantern room above. "The light. It's cursed. It calls them, and now it's calling you." Suddenly, the Fresnel lens above burst to life, its beam cutting through the darkness. The whispers stopped, replaced by a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from the very walls. Callum bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The shadows closed in, their icy touch numbing his skin. Eliza's voice broke through the chaos. "Destroy the lens!" she cried. "It's the only way!" Summoning his courage, Callum raced up the spiral staircase, the spectral figures following close behind. The lens's light was blinding, spinning faster than it should, casting eerie patterns on the walls. He grabbed a heavy iron wrench from the floor and swung it at the lens. The first blow cracked the glass, sending shards flying. The whispers turned to agonized screams. With one final swing, the lens shattered completely. The light died, plunging the lighthouse into darkness. The shadows shrieked and dissipated, their forms dissolving like mist. When Callum descended the stairs, Eliza was waiting. Her form was faint, almost transparent, but her expression was one of relief. "Thank you," she said. "You've freed us." Before he could respond, she vanished, leaving only silence behind.
The Whispering Lighthouse, Part 3. Months after Callum's encounter at the Widow's Light, the town of Driftwood began to settle into an uneasy peace. The lighthouse, now dormant, was no longer the beacon of fear it had been for generations. But for Callum, the story wasn't over. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left unfinished. Nightmares plagued him, visions of drowning, of shadowy figures clawing at him, of the cursed light spinning once more. Eliza's ghostly face lingered in his mind, her words echoing, "You've freed us." But had he truly? Determined to find closure, Callum began researching the lighthouse's history. In dusty archives and forgotten records, he uncovered something chilling. The Widow's Light wasn't just a warning beacon, it had been used to lure ships to their doom. Centuries earlier, during Driftwood's pirate heyday, the lighthouse keepers were bribed to light the beam on clear nights, guiding unsuspecting ships into the jagged rocks below. Survivors were captured and their cargo stolen. Those who resisted were never seen again. One name appeared repeatedly in the records: Captain Elias Gray, a notorious smuggler who was rumored to have cursed the lighthouse with his dying breath after being betrayed by the keepers. The curse, it seemed, was tied to the lens, a custom-made masterpiece brought from overseas. But Callum's most disturbing discovery was this. While he had shattered the lens, the lighthouse's foundations still held something darker. Beneath the structure was a network of tunnels, once used to store stolen goods and bodies of the shipwrecked. He realized that the true source of the hauntings might be buried far deeper than the light itself. Against his better judgment, Callum returned to Driftwood. He enlisted the help of a local historian, a grizzled man named Arthur, who had spent decades piecing together the town's shadowy past. Together, they climbed the cliff to the lighthouse. The air was heavy, the sky darkening as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Inside, the lighthouse felt different, quieter, but not at peace. Callum's flashlight cut through the gloom as Arthur led him to a rusted trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of debris. The metal groaned as they forced it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the earth. "Are you sure about this?" Arthur asked, his voice tinged with unease. "No," Callum admitted, "but I need to know." The air grew colder as they descended, the walls slick with moisture. The tunnels were cramped and suffocating, lined with rotting wooden crates and ancient tools. Deeper still, the whispers began again, faint and fleeting, like a distant wind. They reached a large chamber where the walls were etched with strange symbols, their meanings long forgotten. In the center was a stone altar, cracked and stained with something dark. Surrounding it were skeletal remains, their positions twisted in agony. Arthur gasped, "It's a sacrificial site." As they approached the altar, the whispers grew louder, rising to a crescendo. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, and the room grew unbearably cold. Callum felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. Then a voice boomed, shaking the chamber. "Why do you disturb my domain?" The shadows coalesced into a towering figure, a man in tattered clothing, his face obscured by darkness. Callum's heart sank as he recognized him. Captain Elias Gray. "You shattered the lens," Gray snarled, his voice dripping with malice. "But you have not broken the curse. The blood spilled here binds this place. Until it is cleansed, the Widow's Light will never rest." "How?" Callum demanded, his voice trembling. "How do we end this?" Gray's shadowy form loomed closer. "The curse was forged in betrayal. It can only be broken through sacrifice, a life freely given to balance the scales." Arthur backed away, shaking his head. "You can't be serious." Callum's mind raced. He had come here for answers, for peace, but now he was faced with an impossible choice. He could leave and let the lighthouse's horrors persist, or he could end it once and for all. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. Arthur grabbed his arm. "Don't be a fool. There has to be another way." But Callum knew there wasn't. He had seen the suffering this place caused, the lives it had taken. He couldn't walk away and let it continue. He stepped onto the altar, his breath fogging in the freezing air. "Do it." Gray's shadowy form hovered over him. "You are brave," the ghost said, "braver than the cowards who bound me here. Your sacrifice will bring balance." The room erupted in blinding light. Callum felt a searing cold pierce his chest, as if the life was being drained from him. The whispers rose into a mournful wail, and then silence. When Arthur awoke, the chamber was empty. The shadows were gone, the air warmer. The skeletal remains had crumbled to dust, and the strange symbols on the walls had faded. Callum was nowhere to be seen. Staggering back to the surface, Arthur found the lighthouse transformed. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a calm stillness. For the first time in centuries, the widow's light felt like just a lighthouse. Back in town, Arthur shared the story of Callum's sacrifice. The townsfolk mourned his loss, but knew that thanks to him, the curse was finally broken. The lighthouse was left to decay, untouched, a memorial to the lives it had claimed. But on stormy nights, some say they see a faint figure standing at the top of the lighthouse, gazing out at the sea, a watchful guardian, ensuring the darkness never returns.